All right, so we're going to begin. We started last week a new series about the challenges, the struggles, and the trials of the 21st century. What humanity as a whole, not just the Jewish nation, is facing. And one of those areas that are very difficult for many to deal with, to cope with, is adversity and depression. I very much recommend that those who want to follow the series should also listen to the introduction, which we gave last week. However, for depression, it would also be advisable to hear a lecture that I gave several years ago on sadness. There's a series about refining one's character, about 37 lectures, I believe, various kinds of characteristics that one needs to refine, to work on, to develop. People have difficulties in all kinds of areas. Some people are more prone to be in a bad mood, to be sad. Sadness can happen to anyone, but some have more of a difficulty with it than others. Being happy is not easy these days. So a lot of the advice, a lot of the suggestions on how to overcome the sadness is already given there, and I don't want to repeat all of them here, even though sadness and depression are quite similar. Depression, however, is more dangerous. It is a heavier form of sadness. So we need to know, what can we do to overcome depression? Can we do anything about it? I want to, however, make an important distinction. There is something called heavy-duty depression or clinical depression, or major depressive disorder, as it is called in the medical field, in the psychiatric field. And that does need professional help, medical help, psychiatric help. And I hope that a lot of these individuals who need help in that area are getting the help, because help is available. I'm not sure how effective it is, if it's effective for everyone, but it's better than not doing anything at all. And the reason why it's important to do something about depression, any kind of depression, is because it affects us in many, many ways. It affects our performance. It leads to all kinds of ills and troubles if untreated. And therefore, it is a very important area that needs to be tackled, needs to be dealt with. Depression, perhaps, if we try to understand how it expresses itself or what it leads to, is as follows. I'm just going to simplify it because in reality there are many books written about it, and there are many, I guess you can call them disorders that can be identified that come from depression or are identical to depression. I'm just going to try to generalize. One who is experiencing this typical form of depression, not the heavy duty of depression necessarily, but the typical, the more common form of depression, will notice or will feel a certain emptiness, a certain level or degree of unhappiness, tiredness, excessive worrying, guilty feelings, worthlessness, and melancholy. Now, melancholy, you may not hear these days too much because it's somewhat synonymous with depression, even though in the past it really meant more than just depression. But the reason I'm including melancholy is because melancholy is a mood, if we can call it that easily leads to having a lack of interest in what one used to have an interest in the past. It could easily take away the motivation that one may have had in the past. Now, even though depression does the same thing, but it's really more closely related to a melancholic mood, because what depression really is a certain mood, a mood where one feels down, which is what melancholy is all about. However you want to define it, whichever term you prefer, it's very unhealthy. The reason I'm speaking about it now is not only because this is a problem today, it was always a problem, but it's definitely more accentuated today. It is seen much more. And it affects our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior. And it's not just that it affects us or affects the individual who's experiencing it, it will affect him, how he behaves at home, in his marriage, how he performs at work. So you can see already that this is an important topic. Now, even though it is true that there are many triggers that bring about depression, there's not just one thing that brings it about. What I prefer to emphasize, what I would like to talk a little bit more about, is what a famous psychiatrist by the name of Aaron Beck developed. It was in his experience, in his understanding or observation of this problem, it stems, and I think he's 100% right, or at least partially right, that part of the problem originates in what he calls cognitive errors. What that means is that people are mistaken. They have cognitive errors about themselves, about the world, and about their future. And what this really implies is that if a person is mistaken in his outlook, in how he perceives things, he could be wasting his life. When I say wasting a life, what I really mean is that this human being, is otherwise healthy and capable and has much potential. We're not talking about somebody who has, God forbid, a disability. A normal human being who has great potential, perhaps a very bright future, could be limiting himself, restricting himself, making terrible mistakes because of cognitive errors and how he sees things in the wrong way. Let me give you an example that I've used in the past about how people perceive things differently and how it can make a big difference in if they participate in an important project or not, or if they run away from it. You can have various individuals reacting differently, and it will only depend on their perception. Most of you are too young to remember the Vietnam War. You may have read about it, but during that time, I was not in this country, but I'm told that many Americans who were drafted or who were going to be drafted ran away to Canada. They didn't want to go fight a war in Vietnam. Why? You're being drafted, you're an American citizen. Isn't that one of your duties? Yes, to protect your country. But why go fight there? Why go fight in Vietnam? It was a real philosophical challenge for many, many people who disagreed with the government, who disagreed with the approach on how to deal with this problem of communism in North Vietnam. And therefore, they were against what the administration was trying to do, and that is to lead the country to war, to an unnecessary war as they saw it. There were others who simply did not want to be drafted because they were afraid of war. You always have individuals who are fearful, don't want to endanger their lives. And then there were others who didn't want to join the war, not because of their beliefs per se, but because they had better things to do. They may have had a successful business. They didn't want to lose out. Let somebody else go. So you have different kinds of reactions. Then you have those who are patriots, those who care, those who want to contribute, those who want to make a difference. So you can see how people will react very, very differently depending on how they see the war or how they see the particular hardship that they're facing. Take two individuals who are working in a ditch. And in this ditch, the city is laying down pipes, sewer pipes, water pipes. It's very hard work, being in the sun, sweating, being in a ditch, working so hard. One of them looks at this as a hardship, as something that he doesn't enjoy, something that he really would prefer not to be doing. This is so difficult, I'm sweating, I'm not happy about it. What kind of a job is this? Even though it pays okay. He doesn't like, he's not enjoying it. Whereas the other one who's doing the same work, being paid exactly the same thing, he's so happy. He's actually singing to himself as he's working because he knows he's contributing to the welfare of the people living in the city. He's going to make life easier for them. He's going to provide for them certain services. He's so proud of himself, of what he's doing. It's menial. It's difficult. It's not an easy job, but his attitude is different. His perspective is different. This is all in the mind. So yes, what is in the mind can make a big difference. And therefore, one of the consequences of depression, if one continues with this, is that he somehow loses self-esteem. He doesn't believe in himself. Every human being is endowed with a certain level of self-esteem. That is natural. God made it so when he gave us the soul, the neshama. Normal human being and healthy human being feels happy to be able to contribute, to work, right? To do things that are productive. That's all embedded in the subconscious mind. What's the subconscious mind? The soul. So naturally we're attracted to doing God's will, naturally. There's obviously things that prevent us or block our way from doing it, but naturally the soul does want to do the right thing. It has a positive and healthy outlook, but something gets in the way. And at some point people lose that self-esteem that should be there. Self-esteem is very important. Today, however, this problem of depression, of lack of self-esteem, is exacerbated. It's much more of a problem than it used to be because of the amount of stress. That people are under a lot of stress today, much more than in the past. It's exacerbated also because emunah, faith in God, has become weaker. People used to have a purer faith, a stronger faith. They were prepared for self-sacrifice. They were more devoted, not only to God, to their parents, to the teachers, to an older woman, giving them, take my seat in the bus. All of that is changing. Why? The perception is different. A lot has changed, but perception is one of them. And that has tremendous consequences, as we said before, cognitive errors, having the wrong perception about oneself and about life, about the world. And besides stress and a weaker faith, we have a tremendous emphasis on the pleasures, on the physical pleasures. What's wrong with that? You may recall what the Rambam, Maimonides, says. He was a doctor. The majority, not all, the majority of illnesses comes from eating the wrong food or from eating too much healthy food. Too much of a good thing is also no good. What do we have today? Something called obesity, especially in this country, in the United States. People are eating a lot. Junk food and good food. But he says both are no good. In other words, even if you eat a little bit of junk food, it's no good. But even if you eat a lot of good food, it's also going to kill. It's not good. It's not good for the body. So in the same way that feeding the wrong food to the body is no good, depriving of it, of any food, is also no good, right? I mean, obviously, the body needs to eat. What happens, however, when we overdo it, in other words, when we feed only the body and we forget about the neshama. The neshama also needs its food. There's a loss of balance. There should be. The same way that the body has to be balanced in having the nutrients that it needs to support life. By overemphasizing, by overfeeding the body too much, we are depriving the soul. We lose our connection with the soul. We forget that the soul needs to be fed too. It needs to be nourished. And the soul has a different kind of food than the body. Not only does it have a different kind of food, the soul and the body are very, very different. And sometimes they're in conflict. They clash. What the soul wants is not necessarily what the body wants. What the body wants is many times not what the soul agrees to. But they're together. And this is the battle that every human being goes through in life. One of the battles is trying to have a balance between the needs of the soul and the needs of the body. Both are important. If the body, which is a vessel for the soul, a vessel in this physical world to perform God's will, if this vessel is not healthy, it won't be able to work. It's a terrible crime, a terrible sin to mistreat the physical body. Because ultimately a person may be causing his premature death. We're here for a certain number of years. If a person left early because of unhealthy practices, when he comes upstairs, they're going to ask him, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here yet." He basically killed himself. Not necessarily, real suicide, but a slow suicide. So a lot of people don't take care of their physical body. Today, there's more of a trend to exercise and to diet. That's good, that's very good. But people forget that the soul needs its own diet too. The soul needs nourishment. But one of the mistakes that people make is that they think that the human being or the human body is just a bunch of molecules. That's all it is. Take care of it, feed it, water it just like a plant, and it will be fine. It will grow, and it will be okay. No, the human being is not just a bunch of molecules. There's a soul. There's this special divine soul in this human body that needs attention, that needs nourishment. But this is really where problems begin. This is where depression begins. And in order to understand how it really begins, I gave you a little bit of an introduction as to what psychiatrists say. And of course, there are other explanations. There are quite a few explanations as to what brings about or what triggers depression. And we emphasized or concentrated more on the cognitive errors. Because cognitive errors, if we can overcome them, will be very, very helpful in eliminating almost any instance of depression and sadness. That's why I chose to emphasize this problem. But there are other causes. In order to understand, however, the root of the problem, the root is something which is a lot deeper than what is cognitive. For the root of the problem, we have to turn to the Kabbalah. And this is one area that very few people are aware of. Most people don't read too much into what the Kabbalah has to say about the soul and the body. They heard about Kabbalah, and they may have attended some classes about some of its principles and concepts, but there's a certain important detail that escapes many of them. Even those who are serious about Kabbalah, they may have run into this detail, but did not realize the importance of it and how one can really apply it in his life, or how one can see how it's very significant. This detail is the light of God, the light of Hashem. Light of God? What is the light of God? We see physical light, we see sunlight, but there is a spiritual light that permeates all existence, the entire universe. Some of this light, however, is blocked from time to time for a variety of reasons. This light, as it comes down and shines on earth, it brings about tremendous abundance, tremendous blessing and good. Let's just make it simple. This spiritual, divine light, when it shines down, the effect of it is to bring about a certain uplifting to the world. Human beings, if they are under this light, they feel uplifted, they feel elevated, they feel good. Whenever this light shines brightly on human beings, on the world, there's blessing. Everything is good. Now, you may ask, of course, when was the last time this light shone? The light shines all the time, but sometimes it's brighter than others, than at other times. So I'm talking about at the most ideal situation where the light is shining very, very bright. Unfortunately, it hasn't been too bright, which is what we'll talk about. But when it does, it makes such a big difference. Everything is just much better. There's peace, there's harmony, people feel better. Now, why would this light make any difference to how people feel? So the Kabbalah explains what this light accomplishes, what it does, is that it connects the human being to his source. Our source is upstairs. The soul comes from above. Even though it came down, it's still connected in the same way that a baby is connected in the mother's womb to his mother through the umbilical cord, through which he receives nourishment, life. The human being has a connection. And what's interesting when I say connection is that I recall that I once was reading some experiences that people have had involving an out-of-body experience where they saw themselves temporarily over their body. It was not a near-death experience, it was an OBE. And some of them were able to see a cord, a spiritual cord, a light connecting them to their body, connecting this soul, whatever it was, above their body, connecting them to their body. And they were afraid to go too far because of the fear of breaking this connection. Interesting. It's possible that there is such a cord, but that's the cord to the body. There is another cord that connects us to our root, to where we come from. The light of Hashem makes that connection. Imagine you have an electronic appliance, an electrical appliance, I should say, that is very sophisticated. But in order for it to get power, you need to connect it with a cord to the outlet. You need electricity. So when the light of Hashem shines down on the human being, it creates a connection. A connection that exists but is not always that strong with our source. This strengthens the connection. And the best way perhaps to understand how a connection works is thinking about a nail. You can take some nails and connect two pieces of wood together, right? By knocking the nail into the two of them. And then you're able to lift them together because of the nail. This light of Hashem, as it comes down into this world, connects everything. And when we are really truly connected, we feel completely differently. When one is connected with God, it's a different feeling. This is called the Or HaEloki, the Or HaShefa in Hebrew. Shefa meaning the abundance, the light that brings down abundance, blessing, goodness. It's a connection. God forbid, one can bring about a disconnect. How does one bring about a disconnect? Through sin. Chet yotzer pirud. The Kabbalah says a chet, a sin, generates or brings about distance. That's what the word chet is. It creates a barrier between us and God. It creates distance. Repentance removes those barriers and brings us back together. That's why repentance in Hebrew is called teshuvah, lashuv, to return to where we were before. When one sins, he's moved away. When one repents, he's moved back. So chet, sin, as well as any ma'aseh, any bad deed, evil deed, causes distance from God. When there's a lot of distance, when humanity is very distant from God, it causes hister panim, it causes God's concealment. How does God conceal himself? Well, when we usually talk about concealment, we usually mean we don't see open miracles, we don't see God. Then we ask ourselves, we wonder, where is he? How does he allow the evil to get away with it? But God's concealment, Kabbalistically, means that that light that could be there is being concealed. In other words, evil, unfortunately, has the power to take over when there's a vacuum, when the light is not there. It cannot drive away the light. On the contrary, light drives away the darkness. Going to a dark cave with one candle, just one candle, and you're driving away a lot of darkness. So the darkness cannot push away the lightness. The light will push away the darkness. But if there's no light, darkness takes over. When the soul departs from the human being, what takes over? Tum'ah, the impurity. He becomes impure, becomes unclean. The forces of impurity take over. Why? So the Kabbalah explains, because there are still sparks of holiness where the soul was once before. And impurities want to take over wherever there is holiness, not only because they want to take over, but because they also derive strength from taking any spark that they can of holiness. That is the way the world functions. That's the way God created the world, that there is an unclean or impure camp that is always doing battle with purity and with holiness. So if the light is out there, it's a whole different experience. If the light is gone, it affects us in many, many ways. We're just talking about depression right now, which we're going to elaborate a little bit more on. But could you imagine what this could do? We don't think of it that way in these terms, because we see all kinds of major disasters. We see wars, we see problems, and we attribute it to human beings. Yes, that's partially true, that human beings are to blame for many of their problems. But on a deeper level, what's really happening is that all that light, that divine light, is not around. And we are feeling it in the way we feel it. In other words, that evil is in control. Truth is not so apparent anymore. And therefore, it has so many consequences, negative consequences, if the light is removed. So, what can one do to reconnect? So we said that if we're talking about sins, sins have to be corrected. Once they are corrected, the gap is shortened and people return to God. Fine. But it's not always a sin. Sometimes people are good people. They did not really commit any sin. But they're still not connected. Why are they not connected? Because they're depressed. Depression, and anything that leads to depression, can cause also a disconnect from God. And what's necessary to bring about the reversal of that, there's no sin involved here, is something called dvekut. In Chassidut, there's a lot of discussion about dvekut. Dvekut means to attach oneself, to connect with God. In other words, the human being can also initiate connection with God in the same way that God initiates connection with us, by shining that light on us. The light comes down, we're connected automatically. But even if it's not there for some reason, we can initiate that connection. How? Through something called dvekut, which I'll talk about soon a little bit more, what that dvekut is. But literally it means to attach, to connect in a very intense way. Also, one can connect to Hashem through pure faith. Pure faith has an additional dimension to it. It's not just blind faith. It means bitachon b'Hashem. It means reliance in Hashem. I rely on Him fully. I not only believe that He created the world, I not only believe that He exists, I also believe that He runs this world, He manages the world, and everything that happens, He either allows it or He brings it about. In other words, everything is from Hashem. The only thing that we are left with, free will, is in the areas of whether we go against His will or we comply with His will. Do we do a good deed or a wrong deed? The area that we call Yirat Hashem, or fear of heaven, that's up to us. But otherwise, everything else is up to Hashem. And therefore, if we develop a strong faith in that He runs this world, and we only turn to Him, we pray to Him, we thank Him for everything. You thank your doctor too. You're supposed to thank people who helped you. But remember that it was not really only His help. It's really God who sent you this doctor, who sent you this donor or this individual to help you out. So even though you owe your appreciation to these people, rightfully so, don't forget the source of everything is God. So that means that we have to have a complete bitachon, complete faith and reliance in Hashem to be able to make that connection. God forbid, if there's no connection, as I said earlier, if the connection is weakened, then what happens is that the forces of evil take over. They have more room to take over. Since we're not connected, they have more room to come in and take over. So far, we got the impression that deeds can make a difference. In other words, if one commits a sin, if one does something to disconnect, right, it can bring about a short circuit, if you want to call it that way, or it can bring about a complete disconnect from God through one's deeds and one's actions. It's true. This is the Olam HaAsiyah, this is the physical world, the world where we perform. And deeds matter a lot. Deeds count. You can't just say, I believe. One is required to do. One is required to perform certain things in order to achieve certain things. You can't just have a belief. But here comes a big surprise. Even though deeds are important, machshava, our thoughts, are extremely important as well. But it's only a thought, yes. In the spiritual world, a thought is very, very influential. A thought is an important factor in bringing about all kinds of good things or bad things. And we see this in halakha. If a person did not have the right thought about what he's about to do, it can make a big difference. It can make a difference in the laws of tum'ah v'tahara, the laws of purity or not. What was my thought? What was my intention? It makes a big difference in many areas in Judaism. But it's only a thought. Yeah. Because in the area of spirituality, a thought is a heavyweight. A thought matters a lot. We don't think that way so much because it's just a thought. I didn't mean it, they say. That wasn't my intention. A thought is very, very significant. Therefore, since a thought is very significant, one has to adopt the right thought. One has to have positive thoughts. And the most powerful positive thought of all, I call it the master key to opening up or to resolving many issues and problems in life. The master key that opens all locks is bitachon b'Hashem. People don't realize this. And many people who are religious and who have faith in God don't realize what they're missing and how their life would be so different if they would have this master key called bitachon b'Hashem. So we spoke earlier about connecting. I'm not going to get into how to connect right now. There are various books that guide people who want to connect to Hashem, how to connect. Perhaps, maybe we'll talk about it another time. How to be davek b'Hashem. How to bring about a stronger relationship with Hashem. There's a lot of books that can help us with that. Here I want to stress something that will be helpful in overcoming depression. Something that will be helpful in many areas of our life. And that's why I call it the master key. It opens up all the locks, all the difficulties practically that one may have, is if he trusts in Hashem, if he relies on him. Now that's not easy. I'm just telling you right now that that's one of the answers. That's the master key. There are other things that one can do to strengthen that connection, but this one is the master key. We spoke about the positive outlook because we began to talk about cognitive errors. If one is mistaken about himself, about life, if he has the wrong ideas of what he's doing here, what his mission is, he may not be happy about it. So it is important to have a clear understanding of what life is. What is the human being? What am I doing here? The proper outlook will bring about a change in attitude. Remember the two workers? One says, I'm happy, I'm proud to be working in this ditch, digging away, sweating in the hot sun. But I'm helping all these people. They will benefit from this. They will enjoy it. It brings me tremendous happiness. And the other one is upset. He feels that he's digging his own grave, right? Working in this ditch. What we see so far is that depression will not really be a problem with those who are more believers. The more of a believer one is, the less likely he will experience depression. Because even though I spoke about bitachon, which is a high level of belief and faith, still, statistically, they have shown this. This is not me saying it. Statistics have shown, right? Those who have researched this, that those who are more religious, those who have belief in God, are less likely to experience depression because the numbers are showing that they don't have this problem as much as others who have this emptiness in their life, who don't have any belief. But today, as I began to say, depression is more of a problem than it used to be in the past. Right? This series is about the challenges of the 21st century. It's not just depression, it's about depression being more of a problem today. So we need to understand what's worse today, or what happened today, what's going on now more than before. So I mentioned earlier that I very much advise for those who didn't have a chance to listen to the introduction to the series because those certain points are emphasized in the introduction. But briefly, I will mention that there's something going on today more than ever. There was more than in the past. And that is that the forces of evil, the impure forces, are running wild. They almost have a free hand. Society in this country, when I say society, I include the government, has become much more liberal. And this, of course, is not just here, it's in other countries as well. It has affected the mentality and the priorities that people have in general. Liberal meaning that there are no boundaries almost. Thank God that there's a little bit of law and order, because otherwise you would have anarchy. Thank God that people still recognize the need for policemen, for an army, for a government, because otherwise it would be terrible, because human beings are capable of being like an animal, of doing the worst. Look what's going on in other places in the world where you do have anarchy, pretty much. Look what they're doing to each other. Terrible. So what's going on today? The forces of evil have contaminated many, many people's mind. When I say contaminated, it sounds very, very harsh. Contaminated. Well, when you go out to the street in a very smoggy city, you know what contamination of the air is, right? The air is contaminated. It's harder to breathe. It's harder to see. It's just a fact. But that we can see, that we can relate to. The problem is that people do not easily relate to spiritual contamination. But it's a similar idea. When the mind is contaminated with the wrong thoughts, remember we spoke about cognitive errors? When the mind has cognitive errors, in other words, it's been contaminated with the wrong ideas about life, about everything, about God, or when one's faith that he had before has been cooled by these same forces, because that's what they do. They cool off one's faith with God. They're against God. Remember, two camps. One is against God. God created them to be like that. I want you to fight me. It sounds funny, but that's the reality. In order to enable free will, true free will, God created the forces of evil to do battle with anything that is God, anything that is godly, anything that's divine. So these forces are running rampant, wild. And as I explained in another lecture about Amalek, the epitome of evil, the greatest concentration of evil, is in a nation called Amalek. Those characteristics of Amalek, which is to cool off religiosity or to sever the connection with God, really is everywhere today in the world. But in some places it's more concentrated than others. Because they're so strong today, it's a powerful lobby, if we can use the word lobby for them, that they're contaminating the minds of many people. The emunah, the faith that was once emunah temimah, pure, simple faith, is being shattered. It's being cooled off. It's causing the Jew and the non-Jew to sever the tie that once existed, the connection with God. Scientists in the past, Galileo Galilei, Isaac Newton, the brightest minds around in their time, they were religious. They didn't doubt a God. Scientists today who are intelligent, perhaps, have a problem with this. Not all scientists, but many do. They don't want to believe in a God. This is new. This is only about 150 years, give or take. That was not the trend before. What could you say about them? You're smarter than they were? You think you know more than them? You may know about certain things that you see today that they did not see. But when dealing with creation and God, which is common sense, you don't have to be a big scientist for that. You claim you have more common sense than they did? That's arrogance. But it's not just arrogance. As I've explained in other lectures, it's an escape. They want to be able to do whatever their heart desires without any accountability to a God. The moment you believe in God, you're accountable. You just can't do what you want. Because life is purposeful, life has meaning. Oh no, then we're limited. Oh, I don't believe in that. People would rather believe they came from a monkey. And it's all a big bang, and it's just a coincidence that we're here. So these are the kinds of thoughts, or these are the kinds of ideas that are being spread all over the world in the books of biology, in schools, in the radio, in the newspapers. Science is the authority today. And they should have nothing to do with religion. They should stay out of it. No, it's a competition. Deep down, many of them may not even realize it, but subconsciously, they're fighting against this. It's competing with them. And these forces are contaminating the minds of many people. So in order to overcome this, one has to work a lot harder to bring about dveikut in Hashem. Remember the word dveikut we said before. Dveikut is to connect, to reconnect in a very intense way. To accomplish that, one has to work a lot harder today than in the past, only because they are working so much harder to contaminate the minds of people with their liberal views. I'm not looking down at the word liberal. I just use it when I'm describing people who don't believe in restraints. Everything should be free, liberal, to do whatever you think, whatever you want to do. Nobody should tell you what to do. And that, of course, goes contrary to the belief in a God who has rules on how to live one's life. So, yes.
Did you say secular would be included?
Well,
Secular?
there's a lot of secular people who are fine people, who are good people. Right? However, because they're secular, they don't realize that their perspective of life is so different that they could be making many mistakes because of that wrong way of looking at things. You weren't here before, but we started off saying that how one sees life makes a world of a difference in how he will behave, whether he will perform as expected, right? In society, at home. If people look at themselves or think of themselves as, I'm just a bunch of molecules, right? And I have nothing to gain from being a better person. How is that going to translate in his marriage? Why should I work harder at work? Just 9 to 5 and get my paycheck and that's it. What difference should it make if I'm a better worker or not? All of this, including motivation, interest in advancing the world, it comes from a higher source. If the drive to do something is money, then that's not from a higher source, right? That's because one has this inner, desire to have more money, to have, more pleasure. But if there's something that is driving him that is more altruistic, that's divine. That's from his soul. And everybody has that. The problem is that that soul has become extinguished. The light of God that was on the soul is extinguished. And when that light is extinguished, people behave differently. They feel differently. They perform differently. And depression is one of those consequences of a soul that is diminished in its potential, that it's dark, the light is missing, he's not connected. And that's where I'm headed here, in trying to understand what the source is of this depression, the underlying problem. Because on the surface, it is cognitive errors. It's a mistaken way of looking at things. It's a wrong perspective. If we change that perspective, we can definitely help the person. But will that solve the problem completely? Not necessarily. We have to make sure that the source or the root is also taken care of. And for that, I gave you the master key. The master key is really going to be the most helpful of all. And that is bitachon b'Hashem. True faith, true reliance on God. He runs the show. Because once we understand that, the problems really begin to fade away. What we once upon a time thought was difficult and harsh and so bad, this is all from God anyway. There must be a good reason for this. He loves me. Why would he be doing this? Everything changes as a result of having more bitachon in Hashem. So today, because we live in a world that is very, very liberal and very against God, there's a disconnect. And this disconnect is causing people's emunah, those who did have emunah, faith, for that faith to become dormant or weakened to the point that they sometimes lose hope and despair. So today, one has to work a lot harder than in the past to bring about that connection. So what can we do that will help us restore a higher level of faith and a stronger connection with God? I pointed you to the lecture on sadness because that lecture contains some good ideas on how to be happier and how to overcome sadness. And sadness is more common than depression. So I very much would encourage people to listen to that lecture, because that's really perhaps more informative. But for now, since we're really talking about the problems in this generation, I want to emphasize or narrow it down to just a few ideas that need to be dealt with, or a few ideas that we can gain a lot from if we understand them properly. One of them, we said, was working harder on connecting with Hashem, but I didn't tell you how to do that, because that's, a whole different lecture, and there are various books that tell us how to do that. And if you need to know what book or what books, there's a list of them that I can provide you with. But as far as the Kabbalah is concerned, as to what can be done today, Kabbalistically, that can help us a lot with the problems, is as follows. Number one should be extra careful with ka'as, with anger. One of the worst characteristics that can do the most damage to a human being is anger. So again, I'm bringing in the Kabbalah, because the Kabbalah explains this in a very, very deep level. We're not talking about psychology anymore here. We're not going to be talking about the common sense issues that trigger depression. Common things that lead people to lose self-esteem. We spoke about them already. Anger does the following. Since we have a neshama, the neshama has various parts to it. The soul has various parts to it. And this soul is illuminated from above. The soul, however, if the individual gets angry, a lot of that he has, as far as the soul is concerned, a lot of that power, that energy that he derives from all that soul in him, is taken away when he gets angry. When somebody gets angry, he should know that he has just driven away a part of his soul. Nobody sees it that way. The only thing people do see and admit is that when they get angry, they may lose control. Okay? But if you think deeper into that, why am I losing control? You don't have to get into the physical nature of anger as to what it does to the individual. Kabbalistically, it is clearly understood this way, that what is happening to this individual is that he's losing a part of himself, a part of that soul that gives him direction, that illuminates him. And he loses that. And by losing that, he loses control. He says things that later on he regrets. Oh, I really said that? Yeah, we recorded you. How? How did that happen? This is dangerous. Ka'as. If he's a prophet, the rabbis tell us he would lose his prophecy. Anger is a total disconnect. It's a tremendous short circuit in the connection with God. One of the worst things a person can do to himself is get angry. Now guess what? The bad news is that when somebody's doing a good thing all day, the evil inclination will go after him to get him angry. It wants to rob him of all those merits, of all that extra light, of all that extra strength that his soul now has. That soul now is powerful. It has more light. It is elevated, it's uplifted, it feels good. They're not going to leave him alone. They're going to go after him. And many times you will notice it if you pay close attention. If you ever did a very, very good thing that day, just watch out. On that very day, not even the next day, somebody's going to try to anger you. I'm not talking about other sins right now. I'm talking about just angry. Somebody will try to get you angry. So watch out. And you know what? I'm always, whenever I read this in the Kabbalah, I feel bad myself, because I know from experience that almost everything else that we're challenged with, temptation-wise, we can control ourselves if we really want to. Imagine you see your favorite steak, right? and it's a fast day, or whatever. I mean, we can hold ourselves back. Even with a big bribe, it's hard. People love bribes, money. Money speaks to them. Somehow we can get ourselves to control ourselves if we really want to. The impulse is not there yet. We have to think about it. Anger, you know what the problem with anger is? It's almost automatic. If you have not refined your character, if you have not developed that master key of bitachon Hashem, it's almost natural. If somebody insults you, you get angry. You react. You almost have no control. You have no time to think about it. Should I get angry? Wait a minute. I'm not going to get angry. It doesn't happen that way. It can be that way if one has mastered self-control. But how do you master self-control? Obviously, you need to work on that. So you see why anger is so dangerous, so powerful. But the problem is the damage it does is very difficult to correct later. Because how are you going to bring back all that light? You have to reconnect, and that's not so easy. It's possible, but so much is lost when a person gets angry. Now, sadness is a cousin of anger. Sadness is connected with anger. And the Kabbalah says the only way to deal with it, in other words, to make sure the sadness, doesn't lead to anger, is to sweeten it with compassion. In other words, if we get used to helping others, being more compassionate and kind of others, and we work on becoming happier people, then it won't go too far. We will rarely become sad, and will definitely not easily become angry. So there are some tips, of course, on how to be happier and how to be kinder. But that is part of what is required, what is needed to overcome this. I want to quote to you what a famous rabbi, Rabbi Aaron Agadol Mikarlin, said. He says, there's no clear mitzvah, commandment in the Torah to be happy, and there's no clear commandment to be sad, not to be sad. In other words, that if one is sad, he's committing a transgression. There's no such commandments in the Torah. But the rabbi said, there's no greater midah, there's no greater characteristic that will elevate one and bring him closer to God than happiness. More than any other mitzvah, more than any other good deed, this simcha, on which there's no commandment, nonetheless is the most powerful midah in elevating one and connecting him to God. On the other hand, even though there's no prohibition in the Torah, a commandment against being sad or depressed, there's no worse characteristic that can drive him away from the light of Hashem. The Shekhinah, the divine presence of God, is removed from him. It goes away from him, from those who are sad and depressed. Imagine. What did he do? He didn't commit a sin. In the same way that simcha, happiness, elevates one more than any mitzvah, so does sadness drive away the individual from Hashem, more than anything else. So, what are we going to do to help ourselves in this generation? Some easy tips. There was a great rabbi, he was known as the Saba of Novardok, the elder of Novardok. There was a big yeshiva there. And he used to say as follows: if you come to the bus station and you just missed the bus, don't say, I just missed the bus, and feel bad about it. Say, I have come early to the next bus. Always be positive. Half a cup full instead of half a cup empty. In other words, we need to work on this, to develop a positive attitude, not to feel bad. You made a mistake? You're human. Go ahead and correct it. Do your best next time. When people feel terrible, bad, upset, they feel angry at themselves too, right? Makes no difference. That's not good. You need to feel bad you did it wrong, of course, because you need to regret, you have to ask forgiveness. That, yes, but that's where it stops. Do your best to correct a mistake. Don't eat yourself up because of it. Shlomo Melech's tip is also very important. Da'aga belev ish yashchena. He says if you have a worry, which many people have, get rid of it. It won't help you worrying about it. So, literally, that's what he's telling us to do. Just get rid of it. But the rabbis tell us there's something more in the word get rid of it. The word yashchena can also be read yasichena. Talk it over with others. Which brings us to one of the most important cures for depression. Is this pasuk, is this tip of Shlomo Melech. Listen to someone who's depressed. Don't tell him, it's going to be okay, come on, get over it. No, you're making things worse. You have to be very careful with somebody who's very sad and depressed. Listening is one of the best things you can do to them. Just listen to what they have to say. Show them that you care about them. And one of the best ways to show you care about someone is taking the time and giving them the attention. Listen. And when they take it out and they say what's on their heart and what's in their mind, that in itself is healing. So this tip of Shlomo Melech, Da'aga belev ish yasechena la'acherim, talk it over with others, is very, very powerful. It helps a lot when people talk about their problems with others, especially with those who care about them, of course, those who they trust. And what that tells us, that this is therefore a big mitzvah in this generation, more than ever, to do what was always a good deed, but more so now, le'oded, to encourage, to motivate people. You know how many people come and ask money these days? Begging for money? People who need help to marry off a child, for a surgery. Tzedakah. There's always a big need for that. Giving them money is very nice. You know what's going to help them even more than the money? A kind word. Rabbis tell us you will receive 6 blessings for giving the charity. You'll receive 11 blessings for saying a kind word. And what could you tell them? You think I'm helping you with the money? You're helping me. You're giving me the opportunity to earn a merit here. And we need many such merits in this generation. One of these days, you will be able to help others. Words of encouragement, uplifting words. Thank you for coming. You're thanking me for coming? Sure. I just earned a mitzvah because of you. Had you not knocked on my door, I wouldn't have this opportunity. What does it take to do that? The right istaklut, the proper outlook. Is he coming to take my money away? No. You have been entrusted with that money, and that money is waiting for him to take it. God has created rich and poor. He wants some to give and some to receive. And sometimes the same individual, part of his life he's a giver, part of his life he's a taker. What can we do? For some reason, Hashem wants it to be this way. What does it take? It doesn't just take, it's not just kindness. A lot of people say, oh, here, take, and close the door. No. Give him a cup of water. Maybe he's thirsty. Maybe he'll hear his story. He'll feel so much better if he has somebody to listen, that will listen to him. That's more valuable than the money you give him. Yes, give him the money. Yes, help him in whatever way you can. Encourage him and listen to him. And that is a lot greater of a mitzvah than just giving the money. Just want to end with a very famous Chinese saying. And I think I spoke about it in the lecture about sadness. So I'm going to quote to you what the Chinese say, because I think I agree with it. You cannot prevent the birds of sadness from passing over your head. It happens to all of us from time to time. You cannot prevent it. But you can prevent them from making a nest in your hair. Don't let them stay. Right? It happens in life. Yes, people are depressed. I mean, sad. I don't want to say depressed, because depressed is a lot worse. But it happens in life. Sometimes we don't feel good. Because depression is a state of mind. It's a mood. That's what it really is. It's not necessarily a sickness. Remember that. Some people really need a lot of help because it's severe. But generally speaking, the depression is a mood, and people have mood swings. And why is it important to encourage these people? Because of a famous saying that the rabbis say, one who's in prison cannot get himself out of prison. He needs somebody on the outside to release him, to open the door, right? We need somebody from the outside sometimes to get us out of this problem, this predicament. You can't expect everybody to just overcome, okay, I'm not sad anymore. If one learns Torah, that's different. By learning Torah, the Torah is a light. The Torah will uplift us. The Torah will strengthen us, give us the proper guidance, fill our minds with pure thoughts, and neutralize, hopefully, all that pollution on the outside. That's the exception. One who learns Torah has a very good chance of getting himself out of this problem, but it's not easy, even for him. That's why I'm saying, encourage people who are downtrodden, who are depressed, who are sad, who are pessimistic, who have lost their self-esteem. They need it. They may not be able to help themselves. And last but not least, the famous words of the Baal Shem Tov, famous rabbi who lived about 250 years ago, who said that if a human being has the knowledge, that God fills the entire universe, and that everything we do, every movement of ours, is from above, except for those things that we have free will over. But pretty much everything is controlled from above. And even our thoughts can be influenced from above. If one has that kind of a belief, then yitparedu kol po'alei aven, and all the sources of evil will stay away from him. In other words, the cure to all the ills, pretty much, that's what he's saying, is a clarity, a real clarity in that God runs this world. He is in charge. He cares about us. He's involved in our lives. And much of what happens in our life is basically because he decided for it to be so. This is a very important piece of information, and this will definitely help us in overcoming many of the ills that affect society today. This generation, even though it's really going through a very hard time in many areas, has one advantage. And that's something that I wish everybody should really not only adapt and feel and know on a daily basis, but to focus on it on all times, and that is the knowledge that Mashiach is coming any moment. Amen. Not every day, not any day, any moment. People have to realize we are living at a time where pretty much all the prophecies are coming true. Read the Torah, read the prophets. Pay attention a little bit to what's going on in the world today. And say, wait a minute, what's going on? Where is this all headed? And if one really pays attention, and one looks at the Torah, looks at the prophets, looks at the prophecies, what they've said so long ago, why should I be worried about this? Mashiach is coming. You see how this belief in Mashiach is not only an important belief in one of the principles of our faith to look forward to his coming. It's not only important because it will hopefully influence our life, it will also help us contend with all the difficulties today, cope with the problems that people are having to cope with. People who do not have any faith, it's going to be so much more difficult. But those who strengthen their faith, and especially focus on the Mashiach is coming every day, God willing, not only will they remain strong, hopefully they will have the merit of seeing the Mashiach as well soon. Amen.